Hello, welcome to this Easter 2012 presentation called Fear and Peace. Here's a lovely picture. It's Jesus sharing creation with us, and us, as it were, the children, sharing peace with his creation. And in the Bible reading for the 15th of April, part of it says, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." So I thought I'd talk a little bit about that and what that could mean for us. But we have a contradiction. Here's an excerpt from the Builders episode of Fawlty Towers. "My wife enjoys herself, I worry. She'll be back here in 4 hours and she can kill a man at 10 paces with one blow of her tongue. How am I supposed not to worry? Be afraid. Be very afraid." In his book, Why is God Laughing? Deepak Chopra sort of sums up really part of the problem. The material world seems to be dominated by crisis and suffering, and therefore the sanest way to approach life is with worry, anxiety and defensiveness. But once your consciousness shifts, you realise that life itself couldn't exist without an underlying creativity, it goes back to that picture, and that this continuous act of creation is in itself an expression of ecstasy. These qualities are the basis of your life also. So, it might be useful at this point to examine what we're scared of, and maybe those people watching this presentation might want to jot down a few ideas. I'm not here to judge people and say, oh, don't be afraid, and present like an easy vomit-inducing solution to fear, because there is no solution to it really. Well, there is, but it's not as easy and straightforward as we think. So what are we scared of? Once you've jotted them down, you might like to see what categories they fit into. Now, this is not every single category imaginable. It's just those that sort of tripped out of my head while I was writing this presentation. So I thought about useful and justified fear. A useful fear: you don't touch fire, you don't run out into the road because you're scared that you'll hurt yourself. And justified fear, you know, if you've just been diagnosed as terminally ill or something, then of course you're going to be scared. No one's going to blame you for being scared. You know, it just is. It just happens. But an awful lot of fear exists in our imagination. Do we, you know, sometimes wander around beating ourselves up with fear and worry over something that hasn't happened, that might not happen, in which case it can be quite destructive. And then we come on to people who actually use fear to manipulate us, and that's what a lot of this presentation is really going to be covering. And fear that causes us to marginalise other people, probably the most insidious of all. So where do your fears perhaps fit in with some of those categories? Do they fit in with some of those categories? And then, what are the consequences of being scared? What sort of feelings does that induce in us and in the rest of the world? Well, we stay away from things that might hurt us, which could be quite positive. Stay away from fire, we don't run out into the road, but we might also stay away from people that might need us because we're scared of them, which is not quite so positive. We allow ourselves to be manipulated, often by adverts. I had a leaflet through my door the other day saying every 30 seconds someone's boiler fails, and we're assailed with adverts on TV and in the media all the time, you know, even on television programmes, you know, all the time, trying to make us just that slight bit worried so that we fork out on something else that perhaps we don't really need. The thing about that, though, is that powers and principalities, by which I mean governments, brand names, even things like drink and alcohol and nicotine, have an unhealthy hold over us. We become angry and selfish. We're scared that the petrol might run out, the food in the shops might run out over Christmas. We get as much as we can. Then sometimes others become blamed, especially if we're being manipulated by governments. For example, Hitler manipulated a whole population of Germany to blame the Jews and he used fear of them as part of his propaganda, for example. Again, in Uganda, the government and the churches in Uganda are creating a fear of homosexuals, death penalty. In Russia, you can't even talk about being gay on the street without it being 5 years imprisonment. So, you know, scapegoating other people. And as a result of that scapegoating, people become marginalised. And as a result of a lot of our fear and a lot of the manipulation that is used because we're scared, and people taking advantage of that, others suffer. And then that sort of comes back quite nicely from we stay away from the things that might hurt us. And here is an everyday example of fear being used to exploit people. William Stringfellow, he wrote this in about 1969, something like that, but it's still true today, that we're often so assailed with the immediate problems of managing mortgages and other debts, so much of at the mercy of fragile, inflated credit systems, so desperate to retain employment in their status, that energies as human beings are depleted in coping with these demands alone. In other words, whatever you're scared of, not having enough money to survive, to eat, to cover your basic needs, becomes such an onus, such a burden upon us that we've got no energy left here. And it says here, whatever the state of our conscience, whatever our intentions, they're left with little or no capacity to become informed or involved in the issues of politics and society. We become uncaring. The manipulation of these economic factors becomes a means of effectual political control, and citizens who are too distracted or exhausted to become involved are consigned to ignorance and conformity and to being the silent majority. And you have to look at South Africa for that to happen. Well, South Africa under apartheid anyway. This is yet another form of dehumanisation, another way in which the powers of death victimise human life, turning humans into automatons. So to get out of that, we almost need to sort of shift our consciousness. We might not be able to change what's happening to us, but we can change the way we think about it. For example, fear is an energy. We might be scared, but if we perhaps try and remember that it's not us, you know, in the same way that electricity that powers the kettle is not the cup of tea. And recognising that when fear is negatively influencing us is a start. In other words, you know, the healing process can sort of kick in a bit quicker if we start to recognise that, you know, we are perhaps making up this in our imagination. We might be reading a newspaper that rhymes with a daily snail and just picking up on bad vibes that, you know, and being manipulated by it. And if we can recognise that sort of thing, it might help us in our struggle to overcome fear. Learn to control how we'll be influenced. Don't read the Daily Snail. I don't watch certain news channels that rhyme with fly because, you know, owned by people that are doing an awful lot of manipulating, for example. And I know, for example, that will affect me badly. Others, it might not affect you so badly. So read the Daily Snail and watch fly telly. But, you know, I don't. A damage, limitation and reconciliation. I will say those words now, but I'll come back to them later. We need to think about our language of salvation theology, because so much fear is still being instilled by the churches that are sort of using hell as a threat. So here we have a little theological contradiction, or is it a theological contradiction? I saw this on a church banner in a church near me. Jesus came to pay a debt he didn't owe because we owed a debt that we couldn't pay. It's nice. It offers ultimate universal auto-forgiveness. How on earth I thought of those words. But it does. And, you know, I actually believe that, you know, no one is going to hell. Okay? And this sort of says it very nicely, but it sort of takes away from us the responsibility to do anything about it. If we can all, you know, treat each other how we like, governments can rain whatever fears of terrors they want to upon us, and we can be as horrible as we like to other people and victimise them and marginalise them and not talk to them when they need someone to talk to and all that sort of thing, then still have that salvation. It sort of, you know, it sort of makes a bit of a mockery. It's not just enough to just believe that statement. There is our responsibility to play in bringing about the kingdom, as it were. And we'll come on to that in a minute. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. That does not speak of universal forgiveness. Whatever you do, you'll get back. If you choose to live in a moral cesspit, then a moral cesspit is what you'll have. If you forgive someone's sins, they're forgiven. If you don't, then they're not. Now, okay, so you could say, well, actually, then, you know, the churches are justified in saying that, you know, homosexuals are going to hell or whatever. But that is saying, well, if you contribute to someone else's hell, then you're going to get it back, because a man reaps what he sows. You've got a nice little karmic circle going around there. They don't guarantee auto-forgiveness. They place a huge responsibility on other people. If you're going to, you know, forgiveness in action means not judging people, accepting them, loving them, not throwing them into prison or whatever. And that is forgiveness in action. If you do that, then you're going to create an atmosphere where God's kingdom is being brought about on earth. Giles Fraser, in his sort of take upon what the cross and the resurrection actually means, I think puts it very nicely. The crucifixion turns the world on its head. Okay, it's not about blaming other people, the Daily Snail. It's a story of a God who deliberately takes the place of the despised and rejected so as to expose the moral degeneracy of a society that purchases its own togetherness at the cost of human suffering. Okay, this is saying that it's showing up, exposing what a dreadful, sinful society we live in. The new society he called forth, something he dubbed the kingdom of God, was to be a society without scapegoating, without the blood of the victim. So it's not, salvation is not about a punishment for, you know, those who've been bad don't receive salvation, those who have been good do. It's about something that is definitely going to happen, because Christ, i.e. God, said it would happen, but it still exposes how bad we've got, okay? And, you know, we have to play our part in bringing about that kingdom. The task of all Christians is to further this kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. So if we're going to live fearless lives, we need to think about damage limitation and reconciliation. Damage limitation, the choices we make every day, those choices that are put in front of us, you know, even to the extent of, you know, coffee or tea. You know, we have a choice, you know, and if we think about, well, you know, what are the consequences of my choice? What alternatives are there? Who is going to be affected by my choice? And we can gradually influence our choices every day if we start to think about them. And reconciliation, healing, we have to say sorry. We have to say sorry to those people that are still being adversely affected by what we do. Governments have to, and we do, where we know that we've done terrible things to people. And it sounds simple, but if we're going to live fearless lives, don't spread fear. Try and love each other. Very difficult because we're all scared. You know, I'm scared to go and approach people. I'm the biggest coward that there ever was. But sometimes it's a case of swallowing that and going and offering yourself to other people. Actively share God's presence by spreading peace. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. That's what it means. In other words, and it's not asking God's kingdom to come, it's saying God's kingdom will come. It is fact. It's just stating fact. So this song, Ubi caritas et amor, ubi caritas Deus ebs, means God is wherever love and kindness are.